Hey, Omar. Dave Wormley sent me a text today and said, well, good morning. Genesis 16 is where we're going to start this. Somewhere out there is the men's prayer sign-up sheet going around for one last go-around. Hopefully going around. Well, you got quiet. Your flashlight's on, Aiden. Aiden, your flashlight's on. Oh, two phones. All right, Genesis chapter 16. Boy, you were very chatty. I don't know what I did to squash the mood. Let's pray, and we'll turn our attention to this very fascinating text this morning. Father, help us, of course, to understand your word and to have some understanding of then who you are and how you operate. It is obvious in a passage like this, really makes it plain that your ways and your wisdom are far superior to ours. So help us, I pray, that we might learn the appropriate lessons and have good understanding, and I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, after the events in chapter 15, in which God makes a drastic, vivid commitment to Abraham with reference to the promise that he had made to him, and enters into a covenant, we have the events in chapter 16, which I think basically we're familiar with. This is the situation that results in the birth of Ishmael. And it just poses a number of challenges to us, just to our logic and our intellect in the way we think. And of course, there is a tangible, visible consequence to Genesis 16 that we live with even today. All behavior has lingering effects. Some are more notable and visible than others, and this is one of them. I'm going to deal with the chapter along two broad lines this morning, just my little outline and division. Let's begin by reading verses 1 through 6. Now, Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold, now the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid, that it may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. And Sarai said unto Abram, My wrong be upon thee, I have given my maid into thy bosom, And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judged between me and thee. But Abram said unto Sarai, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarah dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. So again, I've kind of put this under the heading of sadness. Verses 1 through 6 are just sad. And there's the sadness of condition. We keep getting told that Sarah, Abram's wife, is childless. This is a situation that she does not like. And this, by the way, is in spite of the promise. Genesis 15:4, Behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. And yet Sarah remains habitually, irrevocably, it seems, childless. So there is sadness of condition. She is barren. And we have these time markers. In Genesis chapter 12 and verse number 4, we are given an age for Abram. Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And now we're 10 years into the land. We're 10 years into the land, 16:3. After he had dwelt in the land of Canaan, and we will learn later on that he is 86 years old. So we have a promise, and we have the passage of time, and we still don't have a child. And we still don't have a child. So there is sadness in condition, and this is a great challenge to them. And one of the things that we have to process, I was talking with one of the men about this last week. Paul says in Romans chapter 4 that Abram staggered not through unbelief at the promise. And now we have Genesis chapter 16. And it seems that the problem in Genesis 16 is not one of absolute unbelief, right? It's never going to happen. It is the problem of what are we going to do to bring God's promise to pass? We have the promise, but we don't have the promise fulfilled. So how will we get the promise to come? And that seems to be kind of the situation in which we find ourselves. So there again there is sadness in condition, and then I would say there is sadness in conduct. Right? Sarah's really been thinking about this. And so we have some insight into her thinking in verse number 2. Sarai said unto Abram, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. The Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. So Sarah comes up with this plan in her own mind. God won't let me have children. But I do have this Egyptian handmaid, so you have her. And then the child, and if you look carefully at how it's written there, it may be that I may obtain children by her. Sarah fully expects that this child will be hers because she is the owner of this Egyptian handmaid. And we don't know this, so it may not be so, but I think the most logical assumption is that during that little excursion into Egypt, when Abram became rich, and had all these men servants and women servants, that Hagar was one of them that he brought with him out of the land of Egypt. Abraham very foolishly agrees, the end of verse number 2, and Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarah. This is, by the way, if you want to go back to Genesis chapter 3 for a moment, because I think it's critically important. This is exactly what is said about Adam. Genesis chapter 3 and verse number 17. Unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake, and sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. So that is an exact replica statement. Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarah. Adam hearkened to the voice of his wife. This is the sin. The failure of Adam is the failure of Abraham. It is, gentlemen, the failure, right? Male leadership in the home is not really about meal planning and paint colors. And I don't mean to demean any woman in that area, but it is not wielding dominion over every minute detail of the home because you're the head of the home. But it is about the protection and promotion of righteousness within the home. And Abram should have risen to this challenge and went, you know what, sweetie, I love you to death, but we're not doing that. Right? We're not doing that. This has bad idea written all over it. But instead, Abram hearkens to the voice of his wife, verse number 3. Sarah's idea becomes reality. Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband, Abram, to be his wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. The idea becomes a reality, and Hagar, unlike Sarah, conceives apparently easily and almost immediately. The many years, we do not know how old Abram was when he married Sarah. We know that he's 75 years old when he gets the promise, and they had no children. And now another 10 years have passed, and she has no children. And then for the very first time, in verse number 4, we have some kind of insight as to what Hagar may have thought about all this. Because to this point, folks, not only has Sarah and Abram treated her as property, the text of the Scripture almost does. And I don't mean that in any way critically of the text. It is reflecting what is going on, but there's no notion that, they have some kind of a family powwow and bring her into the mix and go, here's what we're thinking. Right? It is all dealt with as if she has no say in it, which apparently she does. When he went into Hagar, she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. She hates Sarah. Right? She is pregnant by this man who is her master, so that Sarah might have her way. And Hagar hates her. And Sarah then blames Abram. Verse number 5. Sarah said unto Abram, my wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. Right? This is all your fault. This is all your fault. And I really don't intend for this in any way to be humorous, but you can just kind of see Abraham sitting out on the back porch going, okay, let me see if I understand this. She came to me and she said this is what she wanted to do, and then we did what she wanted to do, and now it looks like it's all gone south, and now I'm the bad guy in this scenario. And by the way, that word wrong is a word that you and I are very familiar with because it is the word Hamas. Hamas. Wronged. I gave her to you. Right, here's Sarah's logic. I gave her to you. She got pregnant by you, and she hates me. She doesn't hate you. She hates me. And once again then in verse number 6, Abram punts his husbandly responsibility and dumps all of the activity into Sarah's lap. Abram said unto Sarah, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarah dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. So Abram tries to wash his hands again of the entire thing, as if he has no part in this. Right? As if somehow he's just a victim. And so, hey, Sarah, you deal, you figure it out, you deal with it. Right? Sarah's blaming Abram. Hagar hates Sarah. Sarah dumps it all on God. Let the Lord figure it out. Abram says to Sarah, you take care of it. Nobody's happy. The whole thing is a mess. And the whole thing is so humiliating and degrading that ultimately what Hagar does in verse number 6 is runs away. Just runs away. When Sarah dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. That's a very harsh word, hardly. It is the word afflict in Genesis 15:13. It is the same word that is translated defiled in Genesis 34:2. Shechem defiled Dinah, dealt harshly with her. And so what we have here, folks, in these first 6 verses is kind of an entire laundry list of sin. I mean, it's just piled up all of the sin that there can be. There is no prayer. There is no consulting the Lord. There is no conversation. I mean, God is treated as dispassionately and as impersonally as Hagar is. God didn't let me have kids. Here's my idea. And then God is brought back into the picture. Now, okay, let the Lord sort this mess out. There is potentially adultery. We could have a lengthy conversation about the legitimacy and the legality of whether or not this was a marriage. Verse number 3, she gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And within the Hebrew, the challenge of that is that the word wife and the word woman are the same word. So does Moses, as he writes about this, mean that she became his woman, or does it mean that she became his wife? And I think there's some other texts later on with reference to Hagar that will call the legitimacy of the marriage into question. And of course, we're well in advance of the days when the law comes in to deal with and regulate plural marriages. And if we do have a legitimate plural marriage, Sarah is certainly in the wrong for not abiding, and Abram is too, by not abiding by the legal dimensions of plural marriage, which is equal treatment for each wife. There is the abdication of spiritual responsibility on the part of Abraham. There is Sarah's clear self-will and selfishness, right? I mean, did she really think that this was a good idea and a viable solution? Was she completely unprepared for the emotional trauma that she would experience when her husband went into another woman and they actually did conceive and she could not conceive? We're never told. I mean, just as a kind of a side note, folks, the Bible never psychoanalyzes anybody, right? And it certainly never delves into that world with the view of giving somebody an excuse for their conduct. It's just, did you do it? You were wrong. Or did you not do it? That's the way it's dealt with. There is malice, there is ill will, there is vengeance, there is failure to love one's neighbor as oneself, there is trusting in one's own heart and exalting one's own idea. Again, an entire laundry list. I'm sure that I have in no way exhausted all of the sin and all of the ways that this conduct is dishonoring to the Lord. So the first 6 verses are, to me, very heavy with sadness. Sadness of condition, sadness of conduct. People behaving badly. And that brings us to the second section, which are verses 7 through 16 that I've called surprises. Verse number 7 and 8. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarah. And I'm calling this a surprise because I would have thought that if God had anything to say to anybody, he would have said it to Abraham. Or maybe even to Sarah. But apart from the reference to being the one who closed the womb and being the one who is left to sort out who the wrongdoer is, God has virtually no role in verses 1 through 6. And here he shows up. And by the way, here is, all right, because this is one of the kind of things that we get into discussions about. Who is this angel of the Lord? And the text here, I think, makes very clear that the angel of the Lord, in this instance at least, is Jehovah himself. Verse 7, the angel of the Lord. Verse number 9, and the angel of the Lord. Verse number 10, and the angel of the Lord. Verse number 11, and the angel of the Lord. Verse number 13, and she called the name of the Lord, Jehovah, that spake unto her. So, right, as you're probably many of you are aware, the identity of the angel of the Lord is something that gets a lot of discussion and debate. But in this case, Genesis 16, it seems to be pretty clear that the angel of the Lord is some kind of a manifestation of Jehovah himself. All the instances of angel of the Lord to be reduced to the Lord, 16:13. So there is, I would suggest, the surprise of God's appearance, and then there is the surprise of God's inactivity. And this is just a question that I ask. Could not the God who closed Sarah's womb close Hagar's? We know that the reverse is true because we know enough about how the story goes that ultimately Isaac will be born. But it is one of the kind of questions that we're inclined to ask about God. Why did he not? We generally frame it this way. Why did he allow that to happen? Why did he allow that to happen? And why did he allow this little servant girl to become pregnant by Abraham? A little bit of a surprise of God's activity. Then there is verses 9 through 12, the surprise of God's response. The angel of the Lord goes out to meet her and says, Hagar, the handmaiden of Sarah, what you doing? Where you been? Where you going? And the Lord's response to her is, perhaps to our American ears, almost unconscionable. Verse number 9. The angel of the Lord said unto her, return to thy mistress and submit thyself under her hands. What is God's will for Hagar? Go back and take it. And it is about as pointed and as direct and as brief as that. Go back and take it. That's what I want you to do. I want you to go back and take it. Whatever it is that Sarah's going to do, you just go back and take it. And we say, I don't think anybody should have to live like that. But here is the will of the Lord. Go back and take it. And then in verse number 10, God says to Hagar, I'm going to give you part of the promise that I made to Abraham. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. So not only is she, much to my surprise, pregnant by Abraham, this child is going to have many descendants in his own right. And then God goes on to describe the child. Verse number 11, the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and thou shalt bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. And the word Ishmael means God will listen. So that's what you call him. God will listen. Verse number 12, and he will be a wild man, literally a wild donkey, literally a wild animal kind of man. He will be a wild animal kind of man. One of the first wars that the newborn United States got into was with Islamic terrorists, the Tripolitan War. And John Adams said, you will either never fight them or always fight them. And 250 years later, we still have not learned that lesson. Now, there is a technical distinction, by the way, between Islam and Ishmael. But Ishmaelites were the original beginners of Islam and its spread. He will be a wild man. Back to verse number 12. His hand will be against every man. In other words, if you ask the question of the Lord, what does it mean that he will be like a wild animal? Well, generally speaking, wild animals have no friends. Every other animal is viewed as an enemy or an impediment. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. Right? It is. Right? I mean, so here's the prediction of the Lord. You're going to have this child, and he's going to be the father of lots of people, and he's going to fight with everybody, and everybody's going to fight with him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren, with all his brothers, all of his many descendants, which may have to do, I think that it could be understood two ways, maybe a little bit of both geographically. They will live together, but I think also in the sense of hostility. The Bible kind of uses that. This is kind of the way Nimrod was, right? When somebody gets in our face, we tend to view that as a matter of hostility. Back up. Get out of my face. Right? And he's going to be in everybody's face. There's no escaping or ignoring him. So there's the surprise of God's inactivity and the surprise of God's response. Hagar, go back and take it. And then there is verses 13 through 15, I think, a little bit of a surprise at Hagar's response, because she did go back. Verse number 13, she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me, for she said, Have I also here looked after him that hath seen me? Wherefore the well was called Beer Lahai Roi, because it is between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his son's name, which Hagar bare, Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. Right, the Bible is very clear. The Bible text and story is very clear. We will return, because this is not the end of either Hagar or Ishmael. She did go back. She does not protest or fight against the command to return. Neither is there any record of her protesting the biography of her son. We know this, folks. When we have children, it can be very painful to see the flaws in our own children, many of them which are our own flaws. It cannot have been the happiest news to Hagar that she had to go back, nor that the child that she was carrying was headed on the path of lifelong conflict with virtually everybody that he encountered. And she named God, verse number 13, she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me, right? So Ishmael is God hears, and she calls Jehovah, Thou God seest me, because she raises this question, have I seen the one who saw me? Because this angel of the Lord obviously makes a physical appearance. Have I seen the one who's seen me? And so she named this well where she had run away, Beer Lahai Roi, the well of the one who saw me. And this will become a regularly used well, both by Isaac and Jacob, Genesis 24 and 25. Be an enduring quality to the well. And then there is, perhaps, folks, because this does answer the question at some level, why did Hagar conceive? And what is the point of this young man's life? And Paul deals with that in Galatians chapter 4. Let me ask you to turn to this, because what we have here and here's a good place for us to talk briefly about the subject of hermeneutics, of biblical interpretation. It is a common method of biblical interpretation to allegorize much of it, to not take names and events as necessarily literally, but as representative of ideas and things. And of course, that creates an entire way of looking at future events in particular. But the Bible does, so it's not something that I would do. I do not employ an allegorical hermeneutic. However, the Bible is very clear with reference to these boys that there is an allegorical dimension to their lives. Galatians chapter 4 and verse number 21. Let's start in verse number 19. My little children, of whom I travail in birth again until Christ be formed in you. I desire to be present with you now and to change my voice, for I stand in doubt of you. Tell me, ye that desire to be under the law, do ye not hear the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondmaid, the other by a free woman. But he who is of the bondwoman was born after the flesh. That's how we interpret what happened here, right? Abraham and Sarah had the promise of God that through the power of their flesh they sought to fulfill. Through the power of their flesh. Right? I mean, there had to be a physical union. There's going to be a physical baby. Isaac is that child of promise. I'm not talking about simply the fact that there is material beings and people born of it. It was an idea born out of their appetite. It is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondmaid, the other by a free woman. But he who is of the bondwoman, verse 23, was born after the flesh. But he of the free woman was by promise, which things are an allegory, using human beings to teach spiritual lessons. For these are the two covenants. The one from the Mount Sinai, which gendereth to bondage, which is Agar or Hagar. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is, as in bondage with her children. But Jerusalem, which is above all, is free, which is the mother of us all. For it is written, Rejoice, thou barren that bearest not. Break forth and cry, thou that travailest not. For the desolate hath many more children than she which hath an husband. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of promise. But as then he that was born after the flesh persecuted him that was born after the Spirit, that's coming up, even so it is now. Nevertheless, what saith the Scripture? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free. Now, again, there is much going on there, and we do not have time to unpack all that is going on in the book of Galatians, apart from the fact that the book of Galatians, more than any other book in the New Testament, addresses people who have some interest in bringing the law into the matter of salvation and bringing the law into the matter of sanctification. And Paul here is making a point that they are completely and totally incompatible. That it's a one or the other proposition. It was in those days, and it is in our days. It becomes a visible teacher. This event becomes the ongoing, lasting, visible teacher of the power of the flesh and the failure to rely upon the promise, and what misery exists in the world because of these two. And if you ever get a chance to go to Israel, they will still be talking about it. The Jews and the Palestinians are still talking about this. They're talking about their conflict and their relationship as relatives. They come from the same dad. So it is a real problem. So just a couple of observations I have, and then if you have any comments or questions, we can go into that. Right? We want to remember that to God, time is never the enemy of His promises. To us it is, right? The longer we wait for the promise, the more inclined it appears that people are to try and bring about the fulfillment in their own power. Not a good idea. And secondly, the passage reminds us that we're never too old to sin, to be foolish in sin. I mean, I would just really like to think, but by the time I reach the age of 86, if I live that long, I will have learned enough to abandon foolish behavior. But I don't know that we can count on that. All right, do you have questions, comments, observations? It's a fascinating story. Yes, ma'am. Yep. Yes. Well, I'm just going to ask the question. Is it, in light of Galatians 4, is Hagar treated as the problem? Yes, Sarah, yeah, you're absolutely... Well, but isn't that another defect on Sarah's part, that she thinks Hagar's the problem and she doesn't realize that Sarah's the problem. Yeah. You know, we had a lady in the church a number of years ago that said it as well as anybody has ever said it. She said, whenever I'm dealing with one of my children about their behavior, invariably the first word out of their mouth is somebody else's name. Paul. Yep.
And after this incident we talked about today, when he visits Abimelech, same thing. The Lord was all about, nobody touches Sarah. But then he allows all this to go on.
I'm with you. It is. Right? Because if you didn't get that, you know, it's if you go back to Genesis 13, there's at the end of chapter 12 or 13, and Abram goes to Egypt, and the covenant, the promise is in peril because Pharaoh's going to take Sarah. Man, God is right on top of that. And here the promise is threatened by Abraham and Sarah. I am as perplexed as you. On the other hand, if you don't have Hagar, right? We don't have a benchmark for understanding the flesh and the law. I mean, Ishmael is absolutely needed. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, I'd have to go back and go through all my stuff to you know, how I got to this point, but I think that you could make a pretty good case that the Antichrist is going to be an Ishmaelite. That's just right. Not going to be an American politician unless he's an American politician who's an Ishmaelite in his heritage. Anything else? All right, we'll be back at 11 o'clock.